Welcome everybody. I'm going to keep this pretty loose. I'll talk about, I'm just going to kind of introduce irrigation scheduling, some of the new advances in the technology you can use, and a lot of it's come a long way in making it easier for farmers. Stay within the line. And then a little bit more user friendly. So if you guys have questions during, don't be afraid to raise your hand, and I can stop whenever. So I'm going to plow through a lot of info in a short time. So to start, we're just going to kind of talk about some of the basic concepts with irrigation scheduling. Jay had kind of touched upon some of the soil stuff in the morning, and then after we get through that, we'll actually look at some of the methods to schedule your field. So essentially, irrigation scheduling is you're managing the timing and the application rate of your pivot throughout the year. You're trying to meet that crop water demand. In turn, this will improve the yield quality, your crop yield. You're also going to reduce your nutrient losses, kind of like what Kelly had said about leaching. I mean, leaching's good at the end of the year. You don't want to do it at the start or during the season, or you're losing some of the valuable nutrients that you put on at the start. And the big one to kind of define it is you're going to improve your water use efficiency. So essentially, your water use efficiency is a measure of how much crop you're producing per unit of water. You want to try to maximize how much crop you're getting, essentially with your nutrients and everything. You're trying to maximize how much yield you're getting per unit of water applied. Typically, we always refer to this as more crop per drop. So we're trying to improve the water use efficiency. Some ways of doing that: genetics, improved breeding. Some of the work by ICDC is looking at variety trials. System efficiency, so now that's looking at line canals, putting in pressurized line. Also looking at moving from high to low pressure. And then kind of the management efficiency, so that comes back to your scheduling. So there's two types of inefficiencies, really. I mean, you're looking at, you're either going to under-irrigate, not meet the crop water requirements, or you're going to over-irrigate. Both have their issues. Essentially, it's going to reduce your yield, maybe cause some disease, losing your nutrients, increasing the cost of pumping, but it all comes back to economic loss in terms of your production. So don't take these as official, but essentially this is water yield curves. So these curves show you how a crop will respond to water throughout the year. So this is based on 2018 data. But if you didn't have any irrigation, your optimal crop yield is only going to get between 40 and 50% of maximum production if that crop had water all the time at the right amounts. Irrigation scheduling and your goal as a farmer is to try to hit that max, or at least get close, that you're just trying to maximize the efficiency. Anytime that you have inefficiencies in your system, you're going to slide back down this curve and you're going to lose productivity. Also, another way to think of it is, okay, let's take this maximum yield curve as we introduce inefficiencies in terms of application efficiencies, timing efficiencies, conveyance efficiencies. So if we go from 100% efficient down to 80% efficient, well, we put on 400 millimeters of water throughout the year, that could result in a 10 to 15% drop in your yield just from being inefficient while you're applying that water. So in irrigation schedule, you basically need 4 key pieces of information. You need to know how much water your soil can hold. You have to think of your soil as kind of like a bank account. It can hold so much. You want to always be adding and subtracting, but you always want to keep that account full, or you don't want to let that run dry. Soil moisture content or status, we won't really touch about this in this introduction. This will be more of what Gary and Joel and myself will talk more on how to measure the crop water use at that stage. Crop water use is important to know at the stage, not just for skit, it's more for planning. So if I know that I'm gonna fill up my crop, fill up my soil to full, and I know how much my crop's using, it kind of gives me that planning factor that I can know how many days I have before I have to come back to that. And finally, irrigation system. I'm gonna totally change my irrigation scheduling patterns if I'm using a wheel move versus a center pivot. I have to operate them differently. The return period is quite a bit different. So, key terminology, Jay's touched on this. So your soil here, the key levels are field capacity. So anything over field capacity is going to cause some kind of drainage through gravity. So once you get that drainage, you're going to have some leaching, you're going to lose nutrients, and then if you're over that and you don't have proper drainage, you're going to have issues with saturation, which is also going to affect your crop productivity. Wilting point on the other end, that's kind of where there's no more water available. I mean, there's still water in the soil, but it's no longer available for plant growth, and the crop's going to suffer from that. And the key one here is maximum allowable depletion. This term is basically, so we define plant available water as the water between this field capacity and permanent wilting point. So usually we set maximum allowable depletion at 50% of that level. The reason we set it at 50% of that level is as you get closer to the wilting point, there's still water available for the plant, but there is some stress applied to the plant. Also, that 50%, make sure there's a buffer so that a pivot takes usually a day or two to get around the field, depending on your application rate. That gives you some time to get back around and not let it get down to wilting point. Again, 50% is general for field crops. I know in horticulture, where the crop's got a little bit more value and the rooting zone's a little bit shallower, we tend to go higher, so around 40%. You know, potatoes, that was generally what was used. So, number one, your capacity of your soil. Key for irrigation scheduling is know your soil type. Most of the soils in the irrigation area around here will fall into this region, so you can see that the soil can hold quite a bit of water, but actually field capacity line's only here. So anything above this that we're filling up, above that's going to drain out and lost. And that, when that drains out, it's going to take nutrients with it. Below this dotted line, that's the wilting point. So really we're only dealing with about this little bit here. So these values are, this one's 1.4, so that's 1.4 inches per foot of soil. That's your total accounting for that. And then with maximum depletion, you're only looking at half of that you kind of want to manage. So finding out your soil texture. Easiest way, and most of you producers have a general idea of what your soil texture is. But hand feel method, this chart's available online. It's an NRCS chart. I'm sure I think it's actually in the irrigation scheduling manual. Go and take some course and follow this chart, and it helps texturize your soil. Other options. Many of the service providers, when you're getting your fertility tests, will also provide you with some information on soil texture. Also, when you're getting your irrigation assessment done for irrigation certification, they'll provide you with the soil textural information. Lastly, historical soil maps. Most of these are available online. The U of S has actually put out a new tool, this SIS, this website here is a digital version of these historic soils maps. You can zoom to your land location. I'll give you a general idea of the soils on It's a 1 to 100,000 scale, so it is fairly coarse, but at least it gives you an idea of what you're dealing with on your land. So, now that we know kind of what that soil will hold, we also have to know how deep to actually manage that. So, you have to think, when I first plant my crop, I'm actually only managing probably the top 6 inches, maybe, so I really have very little storage that crop has access to. As the crop develops, the root zone increases, and that expands the area of which I have access to for water to store. This is part of the irrigation manual, just some general active root zones. So this is the key goal of irrigation scheduling, is to maintain this root, the increasing root zone of your crop between field capacity and that maximum allowable depletion. So an example, canola had a current rooting depth of 1.5 feet on we know it's a silt loam soil, so for plant available water, field capacity minus the permanent wilting point, 2.6 minus 2.1, we have about 1.4 inches of storage per foot of soil on that silt loam. Maximum well depletion, so now we're looking at 50% of that per plant available water. So 50% means that we only are now working with 0.6 inches per foot of soil. Now if we look at the root zone at 1.5 feet, 1.5 times 0.6, 0.9. So basically we have an inch of water kind of that we're working with, and that's available to that plant. Again, some tips on getting soil samples and textures. Pick multiple sites. There's quite a bit of variability in soils. I mean, it may not look, you guys have a pretty good idea. I mean, you can tell by some of the yield and variability throughout your field in historical context, so you can pick some multiple sites around your field. Also pick representative areas. I'm not going to pick the half an acre in the one corner that's always wet and is it really representative of my field to do my irrigation scheduling. Make sure your soil sample goes down to that bulk rooting depth. That's the area you're going to manage, so that's kind of the area that you want to know the most about. And also, I mean, this comes back to some of the irrigation methods that we're going to touch upon, is sample and depth, so that if I put an instrument at 6 inches and 12 inches, I kind of know if there's a difference in soil texture between those two. So try to do a layered sampling so that you can get that textural analysis through the profile. Soil moisture status. So again, I'm not going to go too much into this because we're going to have some further speakers on this. But basically, irrigation scheduling management types usually fall into 3 distinct categories. Soil-based, so this is putting an instrument directly into the soil, so this DER capacitance, I'll show those in a bit. Climate-based, which Joel will talk a little bit about the Alberta Irrigation Management Model. So essentially we're taking information about the climate and determining how fast your crop's using it based on some scientific equation. So we're getting an estimate how fast that water's coming out. We're not actually measuring the soil moisture. And plant-based. So plant-based is basically using some kind of indication of the crop canopy to give us an idea if it's stressed or not, or at what degree the crop is using water. So we come back to crop water demand. So again, crop water demand aids in estimating soil moisture status and kind of those Alberta irrigation model, or kind of gives us, if we're not going to measure the soil directly, and it gives us an idea of how fast that water bank is depleting. Also, it helps us plan between irrigation beds. So if I know I have again, 1 inch of water, and I know the crop's using a 1/4 inch a day, I can assume that I probably have to come back to irrigate in 4 days. So crop water demand, again, is affected by crop type and variety, development stage, crop conditions, and environmental conditions. The province has put out a number of these graphs. So this one from Irrigation Manual that's located at the back. So again, it shows you that once you plant your crop, this is the anticipated demand for different stages of the crop. So this one's for canola in the outlook area. They have this for a number of the crops based on historical data. So again, that same canola field, we had the 1.5 rooting depth, and the maximum allotted depletion that we calculated was 0.9 inches. How many days until this level's reached? So we know it's flowering. We're looking at about 4.5 millimeters a day. I mean, that's always the key. I keep jumping between millimeters and inches. I mean, most of the ministry stuff's in millimeters, and all your pivots run in inches. So I don't know which one you guys like better. So if we're looking at 0.18 inches a day, so I know that it's going to take 5 days between irrigations if I get no additional rain and the weather stays fairly constant. And lastly, the irrigation system. This sometimes gets overlooked. Rate Irrigation System will determine how much water you should apply, because it's kind of tied to the efficiencies and the return period between irrigation events. So you're not going to come back on a wheel move and run it every 3 days if you have to cover. You're going to put a lot more water on something like that and come back to it when you can, because you just don't have the time. Versus a pivot, you know it's going to take, you run it every day or whatever, and you kind of have an idea of what you're going to get for application. Also, most irrigation systems are designed to meet the peak crop water demand. There is a bit of buffer added just for downtime or maintenance, but you're going to irrigation schedule up to mid-July, and sometimes if it's hot and dry, you're going to go non-stop anyway. So it's really going to lose the irrigation scheduling for a little bit there, just because you need to keep up. And also, time it takes to apply is sometimes overlooked. I'll show you what I mean. So low pressure pivot, 90% efficient. So most of you will have a sprinkler chart that looks similar to, well, you guys would have a fixed gallonage, but you'll know that in 24 hours I'll be able to put on 0.32 inches on 900 US gallons. So as an example, if we take that 0.16 that we know a canola crop's using per day, using this 900 US gallon per minute, what is the net? So net water application over that 24-hour period. So for 24 hours, I know I'm going to apply this 0.32 inches. But I also know during that same time that it takes to get on the field, that crop is also using 0.16, right? Because I know that crop is using 0.16 inches a day, and even you got to count that day in your calculations, because it's still gonna, I mean, there's some argument about whether we're changing the climate, so it might reduce it a little bit, but in general, we're only adding, we're meeting some of the crop water demand for the day, but we're really only adding 0.16 inches that day, because we have to account for that crop use during that day. And the importance of system efficiency, so let's say we had this 0.32, but we would, instead of using this low pressure, 90% efficient system, we're using a higher pressure, which let's say it's 80% efficient. So now we're really only, instead of 0.32 inches, we're only putting on 0.28. So now our 0.16 drop down to 0.12. So you can see how efficiencies and the time it takes to put on irrigation water will work into your irrigation schedule. That's it for introduction. Any quick questions on just some basics of irrigation scheduling. We're gonna go into specific methods, so just wanna see if there's any questions. Ask Gary to come up and do his presentation.